Hello again, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Friday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first is the hazardous weather graphic and some advisories still out today. Winter weather advisories out here until 6 p.m. for the Yukon Delta and the lower and mid Yukon River Valley areas, actually up toward Galena there. And that's out until 6 p.m. Sunday for these areas for periods of snow, blowing snow, and reduced visibilities with winds anywhere from 25 to maybe 40 miles an hour. And also here for the St. Lawrence Island area to the Bering Strait coast, same thing through tomorrow night. There's a winter weather advisory for occasional wind and snow, reducing visibilities. And then up here into the Kobuk Valley, on over toward Selawik and Kotzebue, that's out until 6 p.m. Saturday in that area for the winter weather advisories there for several more inches of snow with the gusty winds occasionally reducing visibilities. And also same thing going on up here on the western Arctic coast. Now back here to the west, we've got a wind advisory out for the Alaska Range for the northern Kuskokwim Valley. That's actually over toward the Alaska Range there. It doesn't include McGrath and Nikolai, but the entire Alaska Range has wind advisory out through tomorrow night and into Sunday for winds from the southeast gusting over 65 miles per hour. And looking at satellite imagery today, we have low pressure here washing out in the Bering Sea as it tracks northeastward here, and associated front, kind of a big cloud mass associated with it, but precipitation mostly back in this area here to about the Koyukuk Valley, and then some extending on down across southern Alaska into Prince William Sound and the Seward Peninsula. Today getting some rain and snow, and this lower top clouds brought a little bit of light precipitation into Yakutat, and it looks like a little bit of an increase in the clouds along the southeast coast, but really not too bad, basically dry today, and still light winds. And this system, low pressure, lifting across Kodiak today, so rain diminishing there, but a fair amount falling over the Kenai Peninsula in some areas. Not too terribly heavy, but heavier than we've seen for a while. Out here to the west, this system was a pretty good low pressure area, moving north and really weakening, just a trough now with a much stronger storm, a 10 storm here coming up toward the central Aleutians with a very well-defined frontal boundary there west of Nikolsky, and spreading rain and increasing winds, 40 miles an hour, 45 miles an hour in Alaska this afternoon, and also increasing clouds now for the Pribilof, kind of in between systems there, right on the outer edge of the clouds with this one to the south while that lifted to the north. So kind of a dry afternoon today, and then that front bent back around into the western Aleutians, keeping it wet, Adak and Atka, and then just some isolated showers out toward Shimia. Mostly sunny over Bristol Bay today in the eastern Alaska Peninsula. Rolling that through again, you can see this taking a track more to the east and northeast instead of right up into the Bering like the former one did. And this front slowly moving eastward, continuing to weaken, breaking through that upper level high ridge that's centered over the southeast coast up into the Yukon eastern interior. And this wave traveling north-northeast, also damping out as it makes landfall currently. Only a 997 millibar system, really not much wind associated with it, but that did bring rain into the North Gulf Coast. So the Kenai Peninsula, Seward had half an inch of rain today, water equivalent, 3/4 of an inch falling at Portage. And those are about the two heaviest amounts, much lighter. I didn't see anything this afternoon at Cordova, and then there was a little bit of light snow over in Yakutat. They tried to extend into the northern panhandle. We'll have a better chance of doing that later tonight and into tomorrow. Otherwise, areas of snow back to the northwest here across the southern Kuskokwim Valley were sleet mute. They had about a third of an inch water equivalent today, which snowfall-wise would translate to 3 inches or so, give or take. But the other spots I saw had much lighter, nothing more than 1/10 of an inch, and most of it in the few hundredths of an inch range. So letting up there around St. Lawrence Island, may get a little bit, probably get into some snow as this lifts north, what's left of it this evening, and some light snow going on the western and to about the central Arctic coast, snow falling all afternoon in the greater Barrow area on down toward Point Lay. And then the big storm here coming into the Bering Sea, 9:55 on the low center there. And that currently kicking the winds gust up to 65 miles an hour at Nikolsky, 45 miles an hour at Unalaska, and Atka had about 60 mile an hour wind gusts today. And again, winds increasing here for the Alaska Peninsula. And the forecast for tonight, that low pulls right up into the southern Bering across the Aleutians. So look for storm force winds through tomorrow for the central Aleutians on the Pacific side, all the way up to the south side of the Alaska Peninsula. And again, that's tonight through tomorrow. Look for 50-knot winds with gusts of 60 to 70 miles per hour. Wind and rain and snow begin to increase Bristol Bay, and mostly along the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta coastline, with maybe a little bit of moisture working inland, but not too much. Really, it's going to be restricted to the coast, but generally see an increase in the winds. And winds start to increase late tonight over Kodiak Island. And this front really washing out in the interior, just some scattered snow showers, all that's left with it by late tonight. And still have that lingering trough up there on the northwest, or actually from the northwest there, Kivalina back up to the western Arctic coast, central Arctic coast with light snow, maybe some blowing and drifting snow. You can get into that for St. Lawrence Island with the winter weather advisory out there. And mixture of rain or snow continues here for the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, mainly western Prince William Sound, into eastern Turnagain Arm. And that'll increase a little bit here over the northern southeast coast. Still that strong ridge edging its way eastward. And this is actually breaking it down. It's going to just ram its way right through it and open the door for this one to come in. And we'll see for tomorrow that low tracks eastward now, north of Dutch Harbor and looks like southeast of St. Paul. 954 millibars, very strong winds on the south side of this system. Here again, the storm warnings, 50 to 60 knot winds here right up in toward Kodiak, especially ahead of this front. Definitely storm force winds ahead of this into the western and North Gulf Coast, and going to get pretty windy through the mountain passes of south central Alaska here, as well as the western Alaska Range. Very tight gradient there, and hence a wind advisory out. It'll come up later for the eastern Alaska Range, but that south to north flow, that's going to make for maybe a partly to mostly sunny day, dry day for the Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, all the way up in toward the Eagle area. In fact, not too bad over the eastern Brooks Range. Snow and maybe blowing and drifting snow back to the west here with this trough, and then mixture precipitation here across the southwest interior areas. And for the outlook on Sunday, that low tracks right on up into the southwest coast here. So this system not falling to pieces like the previous ones have done. The front does very weaken a lot as it pushes up into the northeast interior. Maybe starting to pick up some snow, enhances as it gets to the southern Brooks Range, but dry across the Tanana Valley. Scattered rain and snow showers more prevalent along the North Gulf Coast, and to a much lesser extent over the Copper River Basin, the Susitna Valley. And rain moves slowly eastward here across, well, from the northern panhandle into the southern areas and central, changing over to showers back to the north with strongest winds will be earlier in the day, late tomorrow night and earlier with that in advance of the front. And cold air coming back down, north to northeast winds now here from the northwest coast into St. Lawrence Island, wrapping back around. Looks like quite an area of snow swinging on into Bristol Bay, on up across the Kuskokwim and even the Yukon Delta during the day on Sunday, scattering out to snow showers here for the Alaska Peninsula to the Fox Islands, a break for Adak and Atka. And the next system, not all that strong, just a 989 millibar low. I mean, compared to this one, this really may have trouble making small craft advisory winds with that, but there'll be a pretty good chance of some rain or snow from roughly Probably won't get into AKwx until Sunday evening, so all that will stay out to the west until then. But up here to the north, look for, winds could gust 55, 60 miles an hour here through the Chukchi Sea and the Bering Strait, and places like Gamble. Swinging back around, they won't be as strong, but definitely a lot of moisture coming in from the southwest with that. And for lows for tonight, above zero here, 4 degrees northway, but 11 at Eagle, -2 at Arctic Village, single numbers on the Arctic coast, teens, central interior, and then mid to upper 20s out here to the west, all the way to St. Lawrence Island, right near 32 for St. Paul, mid 30s for the Aleutians, and the southeast coast, upper 20s to mid 30s, lower 30s south central Alaska. And for the highs tomorrow, 40 to 46 here for the Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula, the eastern Aleutians, and highs in the 30s to lower 40s, upper 30s to lower 40s for the southeast coast. And Chinook winds or downsloping winds into the lower to maybe mid 40s here, portions of south central Alaska, and near 40 even in the southwest interior areas, and lower 30s for the Tanana Valley, but upper 20s, upper Yukon Valley, and single numbers and teens in the Arctic coast. And then the lows Sunday morning, not too bad, upper 30s, lower 40s for the Panhandle, 0 to 10 eastern interior, and 5 below to 5 above along the Arctic coast. Lower to mid 30s, quite mild here over the southwest interior areas, upper 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, and upper 20s to lower 30s, south central Alaska into the Kenai Peninsula areas, and mid 30s for the Aleutians. And taking a look at the Sunday afternoon highs, 40 to 45 for the Panhandle, and 35 to 42 south central Alaska, 40 to 45 for Bristol Bay, and lower 40s Kodiak, 30s through the central interior, cooling in the 20s in the Brooks Range, and then single numbers on the Arctic coast, but Kaktovik up to about 11.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
A lot of IFR out here over the Bering Sea, up into the southwest coast, and more so through the Bering Strait, up into the northwest interior, North Slope, Arctic coast. Better conditions here to the east, but we got some IFR along the eastern and southern portions of the Alaska Range there, with VFR in the Kuskokwim Valley up into the Tanana Valley, 40-mile country, IFR for the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, and marginal VFR to start over the northern Panhandle becomes IFR in the afternoon there. Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, otherwise marginal VFR, trends toward VFR, toward Dixon Entrance. IFR, Western Gulf up into Prince William Sound, Southern Kenai Peninsula, the eastern slopes of the Western Alaska Range, and then Southwest Mountains. Big batch still out there over the central Bering Sea, right up to the Yukon Delta coast, Seward Peninsula, Bering Strait, IFR, central western Arctic coast. And for Sunday morning, pretty good VFR here through the central interior, back on up across the Kobuk and Noatak Valley areas into Kotzebue. Marginal VFR, Seward Peninsula west side, IFR for the North Slope and Arctic coast. Still a lot of IFR here, northern Bering Sea into the southwest coast, but now down in toward Togiak Bay, Dillingham, not quite reaching King Salmon. Marginal VFR for the Aleutians. And Sunday afternoon, that diminishes a little bit, pretty much holds over the southwest coast and then inland over there with some IFR right up the Alaska Range, marginal to Kenai Peninsula, IFR eastern central North Gulf Coast, lots of IFR for the Panhandle now, and IFR for the North Slope. And passes tomorrow, Anaktuvik, IFR trending toward marginal VFR, maybe even VFR late in the afternoon. That same trend also for Adigan, lowest conditions in the morning, becoming better throughout the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR with possible IFR in the western entrances into the valley there, and then likely there'll be IFR on both eastern entrances. That same pattern holds for Rainy as well, IFR in the eastern entrance, otherwise marginal. And windy, marginal VFR, mostly south entrance, VFR, north side definitely into the Tanana Valley. And for Isabel, IFR becoming marginal VFR. But I think in Testo, you'll be generally VFR throughout the day tomorrow. Will be clouds, but they'll be above the marginal threshold. And for Tanita, marginal VFR to start early and then will become VFR into the afternoon. Portage, IFR, and Chilkoot and White, marginal, trending toward IFR throughout the day. And for the freezing levels here, 2,000 feet off the southeast coast. At the surface now, inland about cutting the Panhandle in two there. North Gulf Coast back down the Barrens, up along the southwest coast now, back to St. Matthew Island, and 2,000 feet just nudging up to the Alaska Peninsula. And for icing, big batch of moisture coming in here. First batch early weakening at the front coming through today. Just some light icing possibly showing up over the north coast of the Panhandle. And heavier icing, though, of the considerable moderate variety coming right up Kodiak Island, Kenai Peninsula, Kamishak Bay, Alaska Range, and then tapering off out to the west there. Another batch up here breaks off, just isolated moderate, above about 5,000 feet. Jet stream, next storm driving northeastward here. Strong southwest flow to the south of that system, 150 knots, but splits up here as it gets into the western Gulf. One branch heading up across southwest interior, another one cutting up across the Copper River Basin, and then this one diving down to the south. 9,000 feet showing 50 knotters coming into Kodiak Island, 70 knots there, Kamishak Bay in the southern Alaska Range, increasing 40 to 50. Kenai Peninsula up to the Alaska Range there, 35 for the eastern North Gulf Coast, lighter for the Panhandle. And southwesterlies here, westerlies 50 knots. Looks like the strongest winds will be just south of the Alaska Peninsula there, 50 to 55 knots, 25 knots for the southwest coast. And for 3,000 feet, 50 knots coming into Kodiak Island, 60 knots out here over the eastern Aleutians, 40 knots St. Matthew Island, 45 up into the Kenai Peninsula, lighter over the eastern interior. And 10 to 15 along the Panhandle, a little stronger off the coast. Turbulence-wise, pretty smooth down that way. Of course, all the heavier, considerable moderate chop will be right here through much of the southern interior, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, all of the Aleutians, and out toward the Bering Strait area with St. Lawrence Island, and improving slowly in the afternoon here along the southwest coast. And after the break, I'll be back with a look at the marine forecasts.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and we have a special guest in the studio today. We welcome Amanda Terborg of the Aviation Weather Center. Thanks for joining us, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Amanda's flown in all the way from Kansas City, and for those of you that don't know, the Aviation Weather Center serves the lower 48 for aviators, just as the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit here in Anchorage serves all of Alaska. So I kind of wonder, what's the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City doing to help out Alaska, Amanda?
Yeah, you know, we do a lot of collaboration work with our sister station up here. Lately, we've been doing a lot of work, especially in the satellite meteorology.
Okay.
In particular, we have been looking at ways to better identify icing conditions in clouds, which is a big deal up here because, as I'm coming to find out, even though I'm not from here, you guys have a lot of pilots here.
You have a lot of pilots. In fact, when you say you can't get there from here, that's how you get there.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so with icing potential then, what's Kansas City working on?
Well, we are working on something that will help us, again, identify the icing in the clouds. You don't want ice on your aircraft.
No.
Not only does it add a whole bunch of extra weight to your airframe when it attaches to the wings and the nose cone, but it can also mess with your aerodynamics.
Right.
And in the most serious conditions, that can mess with it enough that you can actually crash.
It changes the shape of the wing, and that makes it sometimes impossible to fly, right?
It does, yeah. So we want to figure out a way to better forecast for that.
Makes sense.
Now this particular image is over Alaska. The colors here are a little goofy. It doesn't look like your run-of-the-mill satellite image.
Okay.
But the red is where you have liquid clouds and the blue is ice. But again, it really doesn't tell you a lot where you have icing conditions in that cloud. Because in those clouds there's little droplets and they're cold and they're actually below freezing, but they're still liquid. And that makes them sticky.
Okay.
So when an aircraft flies through there, those droplets are sticking to the aircraft and it can happen amazingly fast.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to find. And there is a product called the Aircraft Flight Icing Threat that does this. And it's basically looking at the temperature of the cloud, and it's also looking at the size of the droplets to identify a probability and intensity of those icing conditions.
Okay.
And if you flip to the next image, this is a case from Juneau, Alaska, where this probably wouldn't have been the best day to fly around Juneau.
Okay.
Now there was an area of moisture that pushed south from the southwest up along the coast that pushed in a stratus layer. And in the stratus layer there was a lot of those super cooled liquid drops or a lot of stickiness.
Okay.
And So the flight icing threat was able to, in the pinks and the reds there, was able to identify where that icing was. Now this is really cool. It's really cool to be able to identify that. There is, of course, caveats to every product. Much as we wish it would happen, sun doesn't shine all the time, unless I guess if you live in northern Alaska during the summertime.
Right.
But we need that sun to be able to bounce off those clouds and to be able to see where those super cool drops are.
Okay, so it's a daytime only tool.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Right now, of course, we're in the era of advanced satellite technology, and there is a satellite that can actually use moonlight to see clouds.
Yes.
And so sometime in the future, we hope to be able to do that.
Okay.
Another thing that is a bit of a challenge is multiple layers of clouds. You can only see so far through a thick cloud.
Okay.
And if it's thick enough, sometimes you can't see a layer of icing that's below there.
Right.
But even besides those caveats, this product has a lot of potential to help out Alaskan aviators here.
Well, it sounds like a really big deal, and something that forecasters at the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit could use probably on a daily basis, and especially in the middle of a really big storm.
Yeah, I would think so.
Do you have a really good success story in the lower 48 using this tool?
It's a fairly new product, and so we're still evaluating it. But yeah, we've had a lot of cases where we have seen that it does tend to capture those icing conditions.
Okay, very good. Well, Amanda, thanks so much for sharing some of the very interesting satellite imagery and the tools that you're using there at the Aviation Weather Center in Kansas City with us here in Alaska. People can probably find some of this information online, right?
Yeah, here is a website here. It's a page from NASA Langley, and they have this imagery as well as a bunch of other satellite imagery that you can take a look at.
Okay, great. And I'm sure our friends at the Alaska Aviation Weather Center and the unit will be using that in the coming months there with your training and your help there to learn more about that tool to help Alaska aviators any day of the year. That's wonderful stuff. So thanks again for joining us, Amanda, and we welcome you to view any of our Alaska weather facts on YouTube anytime at the address below, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Today's sea ice analysis starting to, looks like it fill in a little more from what it was earlier here, but not much. But this weekend and into the next week, northerly winds, northeast winds, tomorrow will become northerly on Sunday here and increase through the Bering Strait, and they'll pull the cold air through, and that's going to also bring the ice south again through the strait quite rapidly. So this whole area over the next 5 days will see a pretty good increase in sea ice once again. And coastal water forecast, small craft advisories on the south coast, 25 to 30 knot winds from the south, and some gales on the north coast out of the southeast. Lynn Canal, south 20, southeast 20 for Stevens Passage, and the areas on down to Clarence Strait with 4-foot seas. Big increase here in the winds with that front slowly coming across ahead of the front, south 40 knots, 45 gusts, 60 knots on the south coast. Clarence Strait 40 with storm force gusts and gales here all across the inside waters, south-southeast 35 all the way up to Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay. And for Prince William Sound tomorrow, southeast 25 and gales here from the North Gulf Coast, strongest on the west side at 40 knots, all from the southeast, 45 knots for the Barren Islands. That blows right on up into Kuskokwim Bay, or up into Kamishak Bay. And southern Cook Inlet has a gale for east winds at 35 knots and east 20 north of the Forelands. Those come down to 10 knots here for northern Cook Inlet on Sunday, and then south 20 knots, southern Cook Inlet. Small craft advisories now for southeast winds there for Kamishak Bay, southwest at 25 for the Barren Islands. And the North Gulf Coast, southerlies 20 to 25 knots, seas up to 17 feet, and Prince William Sound southeast at 20 with 4-foot seas. And then for Kodiak tomorrow, good gales here, almost a storm, southeast 45 on the east side, 35 knots Shelikof Strait, 45 knots from Sitkinak to Castle Cape. And then those storms advancing southwest 50 knots, slowly advancing up the south side of the peninsula, south 30 knots on the Bering Sea side, 45 knot winds coming into Bristol Bay. And for Sunday, 30 to 40 knot westerlies here, strongest south side for the peninsula. Take a turn to the northeast at 40 knots to Sitkinak, then fall back to 30 knots going up the east side of Kodiak Island. Small craft advisory, Shelikof Strait and Bristol Bay. Out in the Aleutians, winds coming down to 35 knots here tomorrow for minimum gales out west. And storm warnings out here south side of the central Aleutians all the way to the Alaska Peninsula tonight through tomorrow. Lighter winds, 40 knots out of the west on the north side and turning southwest for the eastern Aleutians. Westerlies, 35 knots for the Fox Islands, turning northwest or west-northwest at about 35 to 40 Nikolsky, and west-northwest 35 to 45. Adak and Atka, strongest winds still on the Pacific side of the islands, and west 35 diminished to 25 farther to the west. And for the Pribilofs tomorrow, southeast 20, that low center coming up. So you got strongest winds overnight tonight, coming down tomorrow with the low center real close to the island, kind of just to the southeast, but good 40-knot gales here on the southwest coast. East 40, north side of Nunivak Island, coming back northeast 40 in St. Matthew Island, and 35-knot northeasterlies for St. Lawrence Island. Sunday, north 35 again. That's going to pull that colder air and to increase the ice up here in the northern Bering. And those 35-knot northerlies all the way down to St. Matthew Island, turning northwest at 35 for the Pribilofs, 15-foot seas. Up along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, easterlies 15 to 20 knots, and brisk wind advisories from the central coast all the way down to Wales, all from the northeast except from Cape Thompson here down to Wales north at 25. And for Sunday, northeast 35 gales, Wales to Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, 35-knot winds and then good brisk wind advisories, northeasterlies at 30, western central Arctic coast, and east-northeast 25 on the east side. And for tonight, really another in a series of washing out fronts as they come into the interior here, but holding together enough, keeping it damp along the North Gulf Coast, western Prince William Sound, westward here, trying to get in the panhandles, bucking that strong upper ridge, but it's going to give way eventually. And then the next big storm here, 951 millibars coming into the southern Bering. Storm warnings out here for the eastern central Aleutians. Winds on the increase and to a lesser extent precipitation on the southwest coast. And for tomorrow, that front shifts eastward, and we've got a good gradient here across southern Alaska, up in across the Kuskokwim Valley, and rain along the peninsula and central Aleutians, and better conditions on Sunday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.